Seattle. 31st floor. 11 o'clock at night. A man in a gray shirt stands 17 feet above a laboratory floor, ratchet in hand, pretending to fix a ventilation unit. Below him, 6 engineers with MIT degrees are losing their minds over an $85 million machine that is tearing itself apart from the inside. 72 hours of failed theories. 18 hours left before the government closes the evaluation window, before everything collapses. The man on the ladder already knows the answer. He has known for 41 minutes. He says nothing. Then a woman walks in, fitted red dress, silk-pressed hair, the kind of beautiful that makes you forget what you were saying until she opens her mouth, and you remember exactly where you are. She looks at the dying machine. She looks at her useless team. Then, for one reckless moment, she looks up at him, and the man on the ladder makes a decision that will cost him everything he has left, or give him back everything that was taken. Deacon Wells had been fixing the ventilation unit on the 31st floor for 11 minutes when he first heard it. Not the sound the engineers were making. Not the arguing. Not the tablet screens beeping. Not Bernard Okafor's voice running through the same thermal model, for what Deacon had counted as the 14th time that week. The other sound. Low, irregular. Coming up through the floor like a bad tooth aching in a jaw you'd learned to ignore. The AX-9 thruster. Deacon set his ratchet against the bolt and did not move. Just listened. The way you listen when you already know the answer, and you're just confirming what your hands told you 3 minutes ago. 300 hertz from the fuel pumps. And underneath that, something answering. Something the engineers had their backs turned to while they argued about manifold pressure and thermal load cycling, and the kind of theories that look clean on a screen and fall apart the second they meet actual metal. He knew what it was. He had known for 41 minutes. The bolt took 4 more turns. Deacon pulled the ratchet back, checked the seal, did not look down. From 17 feet up on an A-frame ladder that wobbled slightly on the left if you shifted wrong, he had a clean view of the entire R&D floor. 6 engineers in expensive sneakers, 3 tablet stations. One very sick machine behind blast glass, shaking itself apart in a pattern that was not random, not chaotic. Not the result of manifold failure or thermal stress, or any of the other theories currently losing on the whiteboard. A pattern. Running along the casing in lines that followed the resonance nodes like a map, someone had drawn specifically to show where the machine would fail if nobody caught it in time. Deacon could read that map. He looked at it the way you look at a language being spoken badly in another room. You recognize every word. You understand the grammar. And you make a choice every single moment about whether you're going to say so. He did not say so. He reached for the HVAC grate and began fitting it back into place. Below him, the pristine glass-walled laboratory was doing what expensive things do when they're close to breaking, getting louder, getting sharper. The 6 engineers were not a team right now. They were 6 separate people with 6 separate theories and one shared problem, which was that none of the theories had worked in 72 hours. And the Department of Defense evaluation window was closing in 18. Deacon knew that number too. 18 hours. He knew a lot of things nobody in this room thought he knew. That was the arrangement. That was how the last 4 years had worked. You wear the gray shirt. You push the cart. You fix what breaks and you disappear before anyone notices you were there. And you do not, under any circumstances, offer an opinion about an $85 million propulsion prototype in a room full of MIT graduates who have decided, without ever looking up, that you are part of the building rather than a person inside it. Deacon Wells was 46 years old. He'd been part of the building for 4 years. He tightened the last bolt on the HVAC grate and let himself hear the sound one more time. Just once. Full attention, no filter. The fuel pumps at 300 hertz, the aluminum titanium alloy casing answering at 302. Not a pressure problem. Not a thermal problem. A resonance loop. The machine was singing a note it couldn't sustain, and nobody in that room had thought to listen for it, because listening for it wasn't in the simulation model. He exhaled slowly through his nose. His lower back hurt. It always hurt by the 11th hour. He didn't mention it because there was nobody to mention it to. He began to descend. The shouting started again before he reached the 8th rung. The voice cut across the laboratory like something expensive breaking. Not loud, not screaming. Precise. Controlled to a temperature just below the point where things melt, and held there deliberately, because the woman who owned that voice understood exactly what controlled heat could do. I don't want your thermal model, Bernard. I want to know why an $85 million machine sounds like something is loose inside it. Deacon paused on the ladder, just for a second. He looked down. Simone Holt moved through the laboratory the way weather moves, not asking permission, not explaining herself, just arriving and changing the temperature of whatever room she walked into. She was wearing a dress the color of red wine, fitted close through the waist and hips, hem at the knee, the fabric catching the overhead light when she turned. She turned often. She paced the way some people pray, constantly, like stopping would cost her something. Her hair was silk pressed straight, falling just past her collarbone, the kind of straight that doesn't happen by accident and doesn't move unless she decides to move it. She was 34 years old. She was 34 years old, and she was the most dangerous person in this building and the only one in the room who seemed to understand that the building itself was in trouble. She was also, at this particular moment, running out of time, and she knew it. Bernard Okafor ran his hand over his head, 3 times in quick succession. Deacon had learned to read that tell. It meant Bernard was about to say something he already suspected was wrong. Miss Holt, the manifold is pulling excess fuel under high cycle loads. The microfractures in the casing are a direct result of sustained overpressure. If we reduce the fuel delivery rate by, we've reduced the delivery rate twice. Simone stopped pacing. She stood at the edge of the blast chamber and looked at the AX-9 the way a surgeon looks at a patient who has just flatlined for the 3rd time during a procedure that was supposed to be routine. We have 18 hours before the D closes the evaluation window, she said. Her voice dropped, which somehow made it worse. If they close it, the contract goes to Apex Dynamics. If the contract goes to Apex, we lose the DoD relationship. If we lose the DoD relationship, I will be having a very different conversation with this board by Monday morning about the future of everyone currently standing in this room. Silence. The pressurized kind. The kind 6 people make when they're all holding their breath at the same time and pretending they're not. Deacon came down the last 4 rungs. He took his time. He did not hurry. He stepped onto the polished concrete floor and picked up his toolbox with his left hand and stood at the bottom of the ladder and felt, as he always felt in this room, the specific sensation of being assessed and found irrelevant in under 2 seconds. Badge. Gray shirt. Scuffed work boots with a crack along the left sole. Cart parked near the service entrance. Maintenance. Nobody. He should walk away. He knew he should walk away. He had walked away from this room 6 times in 4 years, and he had never once said a word about any of it, because saying a word about it was not his job and not his place, and not, in any practical sense, survivable given what 4 years had already cost him. He looked at the AX-9. He looked at the fracture lines running up the casing, in their perfectly symmetrical pattern, visible even through the blast glass, even from this angle, even to someone who was supposed to be thinking about ventilation units. $50,000. He thought about that number, clear, cold, exact. He set the toolbox down on the polished concrete floor. The sound it made was not loud, but it stopped the room. Heavy metal on concrete, deliberate as a gavel, and every head in the laboratory turned toward the man in the gray shirt at the same moment. The way you turn when something lands in a room that wasn't there before, and you can't yet tell if it's a problem or a solution. Simone looked at him, not through him, at him. Are you finished up there? Her voice was not cruel. It was something more efficient than cruel. It was the voice of a woman who had allocated exactly 0 mental space to the man who serviced her ventilation system and was now slightly irritated that he had created a moment requiring her to acknowledge his existence. Deacon looked at the AX-9. It's not your manifold, he said. Silence. Different kind this time. Not the held breath quiet of before. The sharp, offended quiet of people who have just been spoken to by someone they had collectively agreed was furniture. Bernard turned around slowly. He had the expression of a man who has found something in his coffee cup he did not expect and is deciding whether to be disgusted or just confused. Excuse me. Not a question. The service elevator is down the hall. Deacon did not look at Bernard. He looked at the machine. Your fuel pumps run at 300 hertz. Your casing resonates at 302. You're not cracking from pressure. He paused. You're cracking from sound. The machine is amplifying itself from the inside out. You could add 2 feet of steel plating and it would still fail at the same point. Another silence. Longer, Bernard found his voice. Miss Holt. He said it the way you say a name when you're using it as a period. I'll need to ask you to quiet. One word from Simone. Bernard stopped. She was already crossing the laboratory, slow, deliberate. The heels on the polished concrete, each step its own statement. She stopped 3 feet from Treason, and she looked at him the way she had not looked at him in any of the previous times since she had passed him in this building without seeing him. Not dismissal. Not assessment. Reading. And how, she said, would a maintenance worker know the resonant frequency of an experimental titanium alloy casing? Not a question either. A test. She was giving him exactly enough rope to either hang himself or tie something useful together, and she wanted to see which one he was going to do. I read the spec sheet, Deacon said, on Bernard's desk, when I emptied the trash yesterday. He had not read it. He had calculated it from a materials science foundation he'd built over 20 years of working with propulsion systems that were real, not theoretical, and from a project that had cost him 2 years of his life and taught him more about the behavior of aluminum-titanium composite under resonance load than any spec sheet ever written. But that was not the answer she was equipped to hear yet, and it was not the answer that would get him what he needed in the next 30 seconds. Simone stared at him. She looked at the AX-9. She looked at her 6 engineers, who had collectively found the floor very interesting in the past 90 seconds. She looked at the telemetry screens showing numbers that had not changed in 3 days. She looked back at Deacon, and then she laughed. Not warm, not amused. The kind of laugh that happens when 72 hours of pressure and no sleep finds a pressure point. Sharp, brief, like something snapping. Right. She turned to face the room with her hands up. Wonderful. My entire propulsion team is stumped, and the man who fixed my HVAC has the answer. That is exactly where we are. She looked at Deacon, and something dark and reckless moved through her eyes. You know what? Fine. Go ahead. Fix the X9 by 8 a.m. and I'll give you whatever you want. Take my office, take my parking space, the whole building, have fun. The engineers laughed, nervous, brief. The kind of laugh that functions as punctuation for a joke that isn't quite comfortable yet. Deacon did not laugh. He looked at Simone Holt. She had the attention of someone who makes every decision quickly and correctly and is irritated when the world fails to match that pace. She was also, underneath the controlled fury, and the silk-pressed hair and the dress that cost more than his car payment, exhausted. He could see it in the skin below her eyes, in the way she was holding her shoulders, in the particular stillness of a woman who has been carrying something very heavy for a long time and has gotten so good at carrying it that nobody around her remembers it has any weight. He understood that. He picked up the ballpoint pen from his shirt pocket. Blue ink, cheap. The cap was cracked across the top. I don't want your office, he said. He took 1 step forward. The lab was cold and clean and smelled like ozone and scorched titanium. And underneath all of that, something else. Something warm and understated that was there and then almost immediately not. Sandalwood, maybe. Understated. Gone before he could decide if he'd registered it. I want $50,000 direct deposit. Cleared by noon tomorrow. Simone's smile dropped. Not slowly. Immediately. Like a sorry. You heard me. Another step. He was closing the distance and she did not step back, which told him something. He was close enough now that he could see the exact moment her expression shifted from dismissal to something more careful, more focused. You fix this by 8 a.m. You pay me $50,000. That's the deal. Bernard started. Is making me an offer, Simone said without looking at Bernard. He's a maintenance worker. Bernard, he fixes things. He is not qualified to. Bernard. Her voice did not rise. I said quiet. A pause. I will not say it again. Bernard went quiet. Simone looked at Deacon. She was doing the calculation. He could see it running behind her eyes, clean and fast. The way a person thinks when their brain has been doing risk assessment professionally for long enough that it just runs automatically. $50,000, she said, repeating it like she was testing the weight of it. It's less than 2% of what you lose if the diode closes the evaluation window. He kept his voice level. You have no backup plan. You have 18 hours. You have a team that's been running the same failed theory for 3 days. He held her gaze. What do you have to lose? Something shifted in her face. Not agreement, not yet. Something more precise. Recognition. The moment a person stops dismissing what's in front of them and starts actually calculating what it might be. If you fail, she said quietly, you're terminated. No severance. No union protection. Deacon looked at the number in his head. 50,000. The weight of what that number meant. The reason it had been sitting in the back of his mind every single day for 6 months, cold and patient and unavoidable. If I fail, he said, I lose the only thing I was trying to get in the first place. Everything else is noise. Simone held his gaze for 4 seconds, counted. Then she walked to the nearest workstation, picked up a black marker, pulled a sheet of Holt Aerospace letterhead from the printer tray. She wrote 3 lines in sharp, aggressive strokes, signed the bottom, turned, pressed the paper against his chest with 2 fingers. He read it. If Deacon Wells stabilizes the AX-9 thruster core by 800 hours, Holt Aerospace will pay a bonus of 50,000 by direct deposit, cleared by noon the same day. If he fails, his employment is terminated with cause, effective immediately. He reached into his shirt pocket, the cracked blue pen. He clicked it once, signed his name below hers. Get out, Simone said. To the room. Bernard stood. Miss Holt. The safety protocols, the documentation requirements, the chain of custody for. Get out, not louder. Just final. All of you. Go home. I'll call you when I need you. 60 seconds, that was all it took. 6 engineers, 3 tablets, 1 very humiliated department head, filing out through the electronic doors with the specific energy of people who would be updating their resumes before midnight. The door sealed behind them with a soft hydraulic hiss. And then it was just Deacon Wells and Simone Holt and $85 million of machinery that was dying in a way nobody had thought to diagnose correctly. He walked straight to the test chamber without a word. He knew the access code because he had responded to a maintenance request in this room 7 months ago and watched the lead technician enter it without looking away and made a note of it, the way he made a note of everything in this building that might matter someday. He punched it in. The blast doors opened. The smell hit him immediately, scorched metal, zone. And underneath both of those, something almost sweet. The chemical signature of failed high-cycle combustion, which Deacon had always thought smelled nothing like failure, and everything like a machine that was trying as hard as it could and being asked to do the wrong thing. He walked around the AX-9, ran his hand along the lower casing, felt the heat still radiating through the titanium, traced the visible stress fractures with 1 fingertip, and confirmed what he already knew. They ran in a pattern that was not random, not pressure-induced, perfectly symmetrical, following the resonance nodes, the way fault lines follow the weakest point in a structure. Beautiful, in the specific way that broken things are sometimes beautiful when you understand exactly what broke them and why. So, Simone's voice came from the doorway of the blast chamber, arms crossed, watching him the way she watched everything like the data was still coming in, and she hadn't reached a conclusion yet. What's your plan? Are you going to hit it with a wrench? No. He crouched down and looked at the underside of the thruster chassis. I'm going to decouple the injection manifold. Insert a damping layer between the vibration source and the casing. Then rewrite the ignition timing sequence so the pumps fire out of phase with the casing's resonant frequency. A pause. You're going to rewrite the ignition timing sequence. Yes, with what software access? Yours, he stood up. I'll need your login credentials. Bernard locked the engineering terminal before he left. Then I'll need your master override. Simone looked at him for a long moment. The kind of looking that was also a decision. Decisions were something she made quickly and correctly, and without visible doubt, which he suspected was at least partly performant and partly something she'd earned through 6 years of making them under conditions that would have broken most people. Who are you? She asked. Not hostile. Genuinely curious. The question of a person who has just recategorized something and wants to understand the new category. Right now? Deacon turned back to the machine. I'm the person fixing your company. He paused. Pass me the 1/4-inch torque wrench. Red handle. It's in my toolbox. A pause. Then the sound of her heels on the concrete. The toolbox opening. A moment of quiet. She held the wrench out without comment. He took it. The CEO of a billion-dollar aerospace company, in a fitted dress that cost more than his monthly rent, handing a wrench to the man from facilities management in the cleanest room in the building. She did not make it seem smaller than it was. She just did it. Deacon got to work. What he felt in those first minutes was not triumph, not satisfaction, not the surge of vindication that a person might expect after 4 years of knowing exactly what they were and being systematically required to pretend otherwise. What he felt was quieter than that. It lived in his hands. In the specific muscle memory of pulling apart a machine, he understood better than he understood most conversations. In the way his body moved, economical, exact, unhurried, when it was finally doing what it had always been built to do. He had not felt this way in 4 years. He was not going to say that out loud. He cut his left knuckle on the edge of the manifold housing 17 minutes in, wrapped it with a strip of cloth from his back pocket and kept working. The cloth was gray. Everything he owned was gray. He had stopped noticing that a long time ago. He found the silicone damping material in a discard bin near the south wall. Bernard's team had tested it as a thermal insulator and rejected it. They were right to reject it for thermal insulation. They were completely wrong to throw it away. Because what it was, stripped of the context in which it had failed, was a material with exactly the right compression coefficient to absorb mechanical vibration at the specific frequency range where the AX9's problem lived. Deacon cut it into precise strips with his utility knife and began fitting them around the mounting brackets of the fuel pumps. It was not elegant. Not the kind of solution that ends up in a technical white paper or a conference presentation, or any of the places where solutions that look impressive go to be celebrated. It was dirty, practical, built from something someone else had decided was useless. He had always been better at those than the clean kind. Simone did not leave. He had expected her to. She had a company to manage, a board to prepare for, a dozen calls she wasn't making because she was standing in a blast chamber at midnight, watching a man in a gray shirt disassemble her most expensive failure. But she moved to the glass-walled operator's area overlooking the test chamber, and she stayed there. He could see her through the window when he looked up, working, phone pressed to her ear, reading something on a screen. The constant maintenance of a company that was 3 bad days from a very different conversation with its shareholders. But every few minutes her eyes came back to him. He noticed, he didn't acknowledge it. At 2 in the morning the fatigue arrived. Not gradually, all at once. The way serious fatigue does when your body has been running on competence and adrenaline and has just reached the point where it needs something real, or it's going to start taking things from somewhere you can't afford to lose. He had been awake for 22 hours. His hands were still moving, but they were moving slower. He crawled out from under the thruster chassis and sat on the floor with his back against the concrete pillar and closed his eyes. Just for a minute. He thought about the number, $50,000. Not as a fantasy, as a calculation, as the specific thing standing between a problem and its solution. He had $408 in his checking account. He had 6 months of trying to figure out how to make 408 into 50,000, and failing in ways that got quieter and more exhausting over time, until the exhaustion had become just another thing he was carrying. Like the bad back and the cracked boot and the facilities badge, with the small letters nobody ever got close enough to read. 50,000. Not tonight. Not yet. But by noon tomorrow if he did this right. He heard the soft click of heels on concrete. Opened his eyes. Simone was standing over him holding 2 paper cups. She extended one without comment. He took it. Their fingers didn't quite touch. She sat down on the floor beside him. Not in a chair, not in the doorway. On the cold concrete floor in the fitted red dress, one knee bent, the other leg extended. Like sitting on laboratory floors at 2 in the morning was a thing she did regularly and had opinions about. She looked at the disassembled AX9. I pulled your file, she said. I know. She held her cup in both hands. Deacon Wells, former lead propulsion design engineer at Meridian Systems. Left 4 years ago. She paused. There was a lawsuit. Intellectual property dispute, Apex Dynamics versus Wells. She was not reading from anything. She had memorized it. You lost. They had better lawyers. He stared at the far wall and a patent filing date that beat mine by 4 months and 11 days. He took a sip of the coffee. It was good. Real good. Not the burner kind. Which was interesting. Because I submitted the original technical abstract to an industry journal 14 months before their filing date. Simone was quiet for a moment. You tried to use the abstract as evidence. Their legal team argued it was preliminary work. Incomplete disclosure, not equivalent to a formal patent application. He looked at his cup. The judge agreed. He paused. I ran out of money before I could appeal. Another silence. The laboratory hummed around them. The sound of machines in standby. A building breathing in the dark. My father built this company, Simone said. She was looking at the AX-9, at the disassembled pieces of it laid out on the chamber floor with a care that made it look less like wreckage and more like preparation. He was an engineer before he was a CEO, before he was anything else. He started with nothing except a very specific understanding of how things fit together. She paused. When he died, the board tried to push me out. Said I was a businesswoman, not a technician. Said I didn't understand the metal. Deacon looked at her. If this contract fails, she continued, and her voice stayed level. But there was something underneath it now, something she was holding carefully. Apex Dynamics acquires the patents and the talent, and everything my father built gets carved up and absorbed. She looked at him. Apex Dynamics. The company that took your work. Deacon thought about that. The specific geometry of it. Raymond Cross's company about to absorb the company where Deacon was currently sitting on a cold, concrete floor at 2 a.m, trying to save everything that was left of both their lives. The irony of it was the kind of irony that stops being funny very quickly and becomes something else, something colder. He set down his cup and stood up. His knees ached. He did not mention it. Dampers are in, he said. I need the software access now. The injection sequence has to be rewritten before we can test. Simone stood. She brushed 2 fingers along the side of her dress, not straightening it, just the motion of someone transitioning from one mode to another. She walked to the main engineering console without hesitation, typed her master credentials with the speed of someone who had memorized her own access codes the day she received them, and had not thought about them since, because they were simply part of how the building worked. She stepped back. It's yours, she said. The monitors came up. Deacon Wells sat down at the engineering console of Holt Aerospace 31st floor R&D laboratory, in front of screens that knew nothing about him, in a chair that had never held him before, and he began for the first time in 4 years to do the work he was actually built to do. The code came back slowly. He was rusty. The first 10 minutes were mistakes, syntax errors, outdated command strings. The accumulated friction of a mind that had been applied to pressure gauges and floor drains and HVAC seals instead of propulsion algorithms, and which now had to find its way back to a language it had not spoken in a very long time. He backspaced, corrected, started over, and then somewhere around the 12th minute the rhythm returned. It was like a language he thought he had forgotten. Except you don't forget languages. Not the ones you built yourself from the ground up. They go quiet. They wait. And when you need them again, they come back in full sentences before you're ready for them. He wrote the staggered ignition sequence in focused silence, offset the primary and secondary fuel pumps by precise millisecond intervals, created a firing pattern that looked on paper completely wrong, chaotic, asymmetrical in the early stage because smooth and symmetrical was exactly what was killing the machine. You're offsetting the primary pumps from the secondary. Simone was standing behind his left shoulder, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence without seeing her. Her voice was quiet, focused. She was reading the code on the screen, actually reading it, not following along. Reading. Won't that create uneven thrust in the initial spool? In the first 30 seconds he kept typing. Once chamber pressure reaches nominal, thermal expansion changes the casing's resonant frequency. At that point, the code phases the pumps back into symmetrical firing. He glanced at the progress bar. You just have to survive the spool up. A silence. He looked back at her. She was still reading. Her expression was not the expression of someone being polite while waiting for a result. It was the expression of someone who genuinely understood what she was looking at and was deciding what it meant. You're doing in 4 hours what my propulsion team couldn't do in 3 months, she said quietly. They work from simulations. He hit the compile command and watched the system process the new script. Simulations assume perfect materials and perfect conditions. He watched the compile bar. Metal isn't perfect. It has history, stress points, frequencies it doesn't want to hold. The bar reached completion. The system accepted the override. You have to work with the flaws, not pretend they don't exist. Done. Deacon leaned back in the chair, pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes for 3 seconds, checked his watch. 6:17 a.m. Through the high, narrow windows of the lab, Seattle was shifting from black to a dark, bruised purple. The city outside doing what cities do before dawn. Getting ready to be something different again. Are we ready? Simone asked. Her voice was controlled. Underneath it, something that was not quite fear, something older and more complex. The physical sensation of a moment you have been moving toward for a very long time, finally arriving, and the arrival being both exactly what you needed and not at all what you expected. Yeah, Deacon said. He stood up, pulled 2 sets of ear defenders from the wall rack, tossed one to her. Clear the floor, get behind the blast glass. They moved to the fortified control booth together. Deacon took the operator's seat. He ran through the pre-ignition checklist from memory. Fuel lines pressurized, igniters armed, safety interlocks confirmed. He spoke each step in a low, steady voice, not for her benefit, but because that was how he had always done this. Out loud. So you knew what you'd confirmed and what you hadn't. He looked at Simone. She reached under the neckline of her dress and pulled out a small brass key on a thin chain she wore close to her skin. She inserted it into the authorization slot on the console. Turned it. The automated system confirmed. She gripped the edge of the console. Her hands were steady. Her knuckles were not quite pale, but they were not relaxed either. She looked at him. One short nod. Deacon pushed the throttle forward. Through 4 inches of blast-rated glass, the world became a silent, blinding column of blue-white light. The AX-9 ignited. The sound was not sound in any ordinary sense. It was a physical force that moved through the walls of the control booth, through the floor, through the chair Deacon was sitting in, through his sternum and into the bones behind it. The kind of force that reminds you that your body is mostly empty space and the right frequency can make all of it vibrate at once. He watched the telemetry screens with the focused calm of a man who has already decided, somewhere before the test began, that whatever the outcome was going to be, he was going to be present for all of it. 10 seconds. Vibration sensors spiked, yellow on the display. Normal for initial spool. 15 seconds, numbers climbing. Still yellow. He did not move. This was the threshold. Every previous test of the AX-9 had ended violently between 15 and 20 seconds. The fracture pattern on the casing had told him why, and the damping strips and the rewritten sequence were either going to break that pattern or they weren't, and there was no longer anything to do about it except watch. 20 seconds. The fuel pumps fired in their staggered sequence, the asymmetrical pattern he'd written, that looked wrong on paper and looked worse on the graph and was correct. The vibration line went flat, not reduced. Flat. The silicone damping strips had absorbed the mechanical coupling between the pump frequency and the casing's natural resonance. The harmonic loop broke. The machine stopped singing the note that was tearing it apart. 25 seconds. 30. The thermal expansion of the casing at operating temperature shifted the resonant frequency exactly as calculated. The code detected the shift, automatically phased the pumps back into symmetrical firing. The thruster smoothed, settled. And then it did something that no test of the AX-9 had ever done before. It held. Stable thrust, nominal chamber pressure, vibration at baseline. Thrust output climbing past 100% and holding at 104, steady, clean. The numbers on the telemetry screens doing exactly what they were supposed to do, and doing it without drama, without the shaking and the fracturing and the violent early termination that had defined every attempt before this one. It's holding. Deacon's voice came out steady. That surprised him a little. Chamber pressure is nominal, vibration is at baseline. It's stable. Simone pulled off her ear defenders. She stared through the blast glass at the column of blue fire. Then she turned and she looked at him. Her eyes were wide in the harsh light of the monitor screens, very bright. He could see that she was working, actively working, to maintain the expression she was maintaining, because the one underneath it was something she was not prepared to show in this room or any other room right now. Something too large and too real for a controlled surface. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him, and he understood without either of them speaking exactly what she was seeing. Not the technical solution she had tracked from the first line of code. She was seeing what it meant. The AX-9 was stable. The DUD data was secure. The board had lost its ammunition. Her father's company was still standing. Deacon reached over and pulled the throttle back. The fire died. The test chamber filled with smoke and the soft metallic ticking of cooling alloy. The monitors continued to display every number exactly where it needed to be. He looked at his watch, 7:03 a.m. Outside the control booth, in the silent laboratory, the screens held their numbers, in the particular stillness of machines that have been asked to do something and have done it. and are now simply waiting for the next instruction. Simone set her ear defenders down on the console. She looked at the AX-9 through the blast glass. She looked at Deacon. She looked at the timestamp on the main telemetry screen. "A deal is a deal," she said. Her voice was low, steady, the voice of someone who means what they say because they understood what they were saying when they said it, and nothing that has happened since has changed either of those things. She picked up her phone. He heard the taps, 4 of them, quick and deliberate. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. Banking notification. Incoming wire transfer. Holt Aerospace. Amount 50,000. Cleared. He stared at the screen. The weight that had been sitting in his chest for 6 months, not just recently, not just since the evaluation deadline started closing in, but the long, compounded weight of 4 years of being nobody in a building full of people who had decided that was what he was shifted. It did not disappear. Too large for that. Too much history built into it for a single moment to dissolve it. But it shifted, and in the space the shifting created, he took the first full breath he could remember taking in a very long time. He put the phone back in his pocket. Simone was watching him. Her expression was something he couldn't fully read. Careful, measuring, and underneath both of those things, something else that she was not letting surface. Something she had not decided yet, or had decided and was not yet ready to name. "Thank you," Deacon said. He turned toward the elevator. "Wait," she said. He looked back. She stood in the middle of the laboratory in her red wine dress, the blue light of the telemetry screens behind her, her hair still perfect because she was the kind of person whose hair stays perfect through anything. And she looked at him with the directness of someone who has spent 6 years learning to say exactly what she means in rooms that have never made it easy. "I told you last night that if you fixed this, you could have whatever you wanted." Her voice was quiet, precise. "I don't go back on my word." She met his eyes. "The offer is still open." "What do you want, Deacon?" He thought about a number of things in the 4 seconds before he answered. He thought about the last 4 years, about the patent filing with the wrong date, about the 4 months and 11 days that had cost him everything, about the man he used to be and the man he had become, and whether those 2 people were still the same person, or just 2 people who happened to share a face and a name, and a very specific understanding of how aluminum-titanium alloy behaves under resonant load. "I need to shower," he said. He stepped forward as the elevator doors opened. "But if you're serious," he added without looking back. The doors began to close. "I'll take your job." The doors shut. Simone Holt stood alone in the R&D laboratory of the company her father had built, looking at a closed elevator door, while behind her the AX-9 sat cooling on its stand. Evidence of everything she had not known to look for. A slow, dangerous, entirely uncontrolled smile crossed her face. She pressed it down immediately. Nobody saw it, which she would later think was exactly the point. Bernard Okafor walked back into the laboratory at 7:31 in the morning, with a briefcase in one hand and 2 junior engineers trailing behind him, like punctuation marks that hadn't decided what sentence they belonged to. He stopped. He looked at the AX-9, still on its stand, smoking gently, the titanium casing holding a dull cherry glow in the lower third from the sustained burn. The telemetry screens through the control booth glass showing numbers that could not be real. Except they were real. Bernard set his briefcase down. He did not mean to. It just left his hand. The sound it made on the polished concrete was almost exactly the same sound Deacon's toolbox had made 11 hours earlier, which was either a coincidence or the universe making a point, and Deacon, standing near the service corridor with his toolbox already packed and his gray shirt already carrying the smell of a full night's work, suspected it was the second one. Simone walked out of the control booth. She had straightened her dress, composed her face into something that could have been carved. The red wine color of the dress was the same. The heels were the same. Her hair was still straight and unmoving because of course it was. The only thing different about Simone Holt at 7:31 in the morning, after a night that would have taken most people apart, was the quality of her stillness, which was no longer the stillness of someone containing pressure. It was the stillness of someone who no longer needed to. "The output data," Bernard said. He was staring at the telemetry screens. His voice had the specific quality of a man whose prepared speeches have just become irrelevant and who is now operating without a script for the first time in a professional setting. "How is it? It held. How did it hold? It's never 104% efficiency." Full duration burn. Vibration within nominal baseline throughout. Simone did not look at the machine. She looked at Bernard. The Dode gets their complete data package within the hour. Bernard's mouth opened, closed. He looked at the AX-9. He looked at the control booth. He looked at Deacon, who was lifting his toolbox onto his shoulder with the unhurried motion of a man who has done what he came to do and is now doing the next thing. How? Bernard said it like a sentence with the verb taken out. Who? The issue was a harmonic resonance loop. Simone's voice was even. Informational. The voice she used in board meetings when she was presenting findings rather than making arguments. The fuel pumps were running at a frequency that matched the casing's natural resonance. The casing was cracking from amplification, not pressure. She paused. Fixed with $20 of silicone from your discard bin and a rewrite of the injection timing sequence. Bernard turned. He looked at Deacon, who was standing where he always stood, near the service entrance. Gray shirt, cracked boot, cart. The man from facilities management who had fixed their $85 million machine with materials they had thrown away. While they were running the same failed theory for the 14th time, he actually touched the... Bernard stopped, started again. Miss Holt, that violates every chain of custody protocol, every documentation requirement, every procedure we have in place for a reason. The only protocol I care about, Simone said, already moving, is the one where this company is still standing on Monday morning. She crossed the laboratory. She stopped in front of Deacon. He was standing near the service elevator, where he was supposed to be, where the gray shirt and the facilities badge put him, in the architecture of this building and every building like it. The place where you go back down to the basement and the mop carts and the HVAC units and the particular invisibility that comes with being useful to everyone and acknowledged by no one. She reached into the pocket of her dress, pulled out her phone, tapped the screen several times. Quick, deliberate, buzzed. He pulled it out. Banking notification. Incoming wire transfer. Holt Aerospace, amount 50,000. Status cleared. He stared at it. The weight. The thing that had been sitting in his chest for 6 months, patient and cold and unavoidable, shifted in a way it had not shifted since before the lawsuit, before the bankruptcy, before the 4 years of being the man nobody saw. It did not disappear. Things that have been building for 4 years do not disappear in one moment, but they shift, and the shift creates space. And in that space he stood in the R&D laboratory of Holt Aerospace at 7:35 in the morning and took a breath that went all the way down. He looked up from the screen. Simone was watching him. Her expression was careful, measuring something underneath both of those, something she wasn't letting reach the surface yet, something that required more information before she was willing to name it. A deal is a deal, she said. Thank you, Deacon said. He turned toward the elevator. Wait. He looked back. She was standing in the middle of the laboratory with the blue light of the telemetry screens behind her, and her hair still perfect, and her hands completely still at her sides. The offer, she said. The job. I meant it. He looked at her for a moment. I know you did. The elevator opened. He stepped in. The doors closed behind him. And Simone Holt stood in the laboratory where her father had built the first prototype of the engine that had started everything, and she watched the closed elevator doors for 3 seconds. And then she turned back to Bernard Okafor and the 2 junior engineers who were trying very hard to look like they had not just witnessed something they were going to be thinking about for the rest of their professional lives. The DOD briefing is at 9, she said. Be ready. She walked back to the control booth to pull the data package together, and Bernard Okafor, holding his briefcase in a laboratory that smelled like successful combustion, him more to contemplate than he was currently equipped to handle, said nothing, which was, Simone did not say out loud, the most useful thing he had contributed in 72 hours. Deacon showered in the facility's locker room in the basement. Cold water because the hot line had a pressure problem he had been meaning to fix for 2 weeks. 3 minutes. He changed into the spare shirt he kept in his locker for shifts that ran long. Gray. Of course gray. He stood in front of the small mirror above the sink and looked at himself for a moment. He looked like a man who had been awake for 23 hours. He also looked like a man who had just done something real. He drove to the other side of the city with the windows down. The morning air was clean in the way that Seattle morning air is clean after rain, which is to say aggressively. He had a cousin who lived 40 minutes north and called every few weeks to check in. He had a former colleague at a Portland firm who had offered him contract work twice and been turned down twice. He had a one-bedroom apartment in Beacon Hill with a kitchen table that held 3 things permanently: his coffee maker, his lease, and a folder of documents from the Apex Dynamics lawsuit that he had not opened in 2 years. He had $50,000 in his checking account. He drove and let that fact exist alongside the morning without trying to do anything else with it. Simone did not go home. She had not slept. She was not going to sleep. Sleep was something that happened on the other side of the next 17 things she needed to do, and she had learned years ago that trying to do things in a different order than the order they needed to happen in was how people made mistakes. She was not going to make mistakes today. She went upstairs to her office on the 49th floor, changed into the clothes she kept in her executive bathroom. A fitted charcoal wrap dress, hem just above the knee, heels. She refreshed her hair and her face with the efficiency of someone for whom appearance was not vanity but armor, and she sat down at her desk and she began. The first search was professional habit. Standard protocol when someone unexpected entered a high-security situation and demonstrated knowledge they shouldn't have. She typed Deacon Wells into the employee database and got what she expected. 4 years at Holt, no incidents. Positive maintenance assessments. Union member in good standing. Previous employer listed as Meridian Systems. Departure classified as involuntary following litigation. Involuntary following litigation. She pulled up the litigation record. Apex Dynamics vs. Wells, civil action. Intellectual property. Filed 4 years ago, judgment for Apex. Wells declared bankruptcy 11 months after the judgment. She read that part twice. 11 months. Then she opened the professional database her executive assistant maintained access to. The one that held the kind of information that didn't make it into standard employment records, but existed if you knew where to look. Engineering journals, conference proceedings, technical review publications, industry filings. She searched his name alongside the technical terms from the AX9 problem. Variable flow valve systems, high cycle propulsion applications, resonance damping in alloy composite casings. She found a citation. A footnote in a technical review published by an aerospace engineering journal. The footnote referenced a conference abstract submitted by a researcher named Deacon Wells, presenting preliminary findings on variable flow valve systems and resonance behavior in high-cycle propulsion applications. She pulled the original abstract. The submission timestamp was 14 months before Apex Dynamics had filed their patent with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. 14 months. Simone sat at her desk at 6:41 in the morning with the city coming awake 49 floors below her and a cup of coffee going cold at her right elbow, and she looked at that number for a long time. 14 months was not ambiguous. 14 months was not a filing delay, not a documentation error, not the kind of administrative overlap that happens when 2 researchers are working in adjacent areas and their timelines get tangled in the normal chaos of the patent process. 14 months was a statement. It said this work existed before the patent claimed it did. It said someone changed the record. It said the judgment that bankrupted Deacon Wells and handed his technology to a competitor was built on a foundation that someone had deliberately constructed to look different from what it actually was. She did not go to bed. She called her head of legal at 6:58. I need the full Apex Dynamics patent portfolio reviewed by noon, specifically anything touching variable flow valve technology. Cross-reference with an independent inventor named Deacon Wells. I want every filing date, every citation, every document that has his name or his research anywhere near it. Miss Holt, it's not yet. I know what time it is. I'll need the summary on my desk before the board convenes. The second call was to her head of security at 7:03. I need the access logs for the R&D floor going back 18 months. Specifically Bernard Okafor's terminal usage. And I want a full audit of external communications from his work accounts for the same period. She ended that call and made 2 more before 7:30. Then she walked Bernard Okafor's termination paperwork down to HR herself, stood there while it was processed, which was not something CEOs typically did, and which sent a message she intended to send. At 9:15, the DO'd confirmation arrived. The relief in the room was almost visible. The specific exhale of people who had been very close to a catastrophic outcome and had been, at the last possible moment, spared it. She let them have it for a moment. 45 seconds. Then she moved on to the next thing. because that was what the next thing required. At noon, her head of legal put a summary on her desk. She read it in 11 minutes. Then she read it again. The Apex Dynamics patent for variable flow valve technology in high-cycle propulsion systems had been filed 4 years ago. The filing date on record placed their development 14 months ahead of Deacon Wells's conference abstract, which meant, on paper, that they had developed the technology first, and his abstract was secondary work done in a related area. Except, the original submission record for the abstract existed in a research archive that predated the patent filing. Deacon had submitted it. The timestamp was verifiable, and the filing date on the Apex patent was not the date the patent had originally been submitted to the USPTO. It had been changed, not by much. 4 months and 11 days. But enough to flip the timeline. Enough to make Deacon's prior work appear to come after theirs rather than before. Enough to win a lawsuit that should have gone the other way. Simone put the summary down on her desk. She looked at the Puget Sound through the west-facing window, gray-green in the afternoon light. Enormous and permanent, and entirely indifferent to the fact that she had just confirmed, in the space of one morning, that the company currently threatening to absorb everything her father had built was operating on a foundation of federal fraud. She thought about Deacon Wells on the floor at 2 in the morning, drinking coffee, telling her about the lawsuit the way people describe a weather event that happened to them factually, without the kind of drama that would suggest they hadn't found a way to absorb it. I ran out of money before I could appeal. Said it like it was a logistical problem, like the weight of it was something he'd decided a long time ago to carry without making it anyone else's problem. She thought about 14 months. She thought about a man who had known the answer in that room for 41 minutes and said, nothing, because the arrangement, the invisible and unspoken arrangement that governed every room in every building like this one, said that his knowing did not count. She picked up her phone. She had a name to find, Wendell Shaw. The name had appeared in her legal team summary, a patent office employee who had processed the Apex filing. His record showed he had handled 17 Apex submissions over a 6-year period, which was an unusual concentration for a single examiner assigned to a general caseload, unusual enough to notice, unusual enough to pull on. She did not contact him directly. She had her team locate his current address and verify that he was still in the Seattle area, which he was. She had them identify a contact point, and then she ensured that Deacon Wells's contact information was accessible in a location Wendell Shaw would find it if he was looking, which he might be. People who had been carrying something for 4 years sometimes started looking for places to put it down, especially when the thing they were carrying started becoming visible, especially when a name from a story they had been avoiding started appearing in the news. She put her phone down. She had a board meeting to prepare for, and she had a contract to write. Deacon came back at 2 in the afternoon. He had slept for 5 hours in his apartment, which was not enough, and was also more than he had expected to get. He changed, drove back across the city, rode the elevator to the 49th floor for the 3rd time in 4 years. Deline, Simone's assistant, a woman with the organized calm of someone who managed chaos the way other people breathed, told him to go right in. Simone was at her desk. She had changed since the morning. The charcoal-wrapped dress, heels, her hair still straight, still precise, one side tucked behind her ear. She was reading something on her screen with the intensity she brought to everything and had not shifted when he came through the door. She looked up, gestured to the chair across from her desk. He sat. "I found something," she said, no preamble. She turned her monitor so he could see it. The journal abstract, his name at the top, the submission timestamp. 14 months before Apex filed. Deacon looked at it. He had not seen this document in 4 years. He had known it existed. He had submitted it himself to a conference he had been planning to attend before everything collapsed. The abstract had been accepted and published, and had then become irrelevant when the conference happened during the worst month of the litigation, and he had been in a deposition instead of a presentation hall. He had tried to use it as evidence. They buried it, he said. Argued it was preliminary work, incomplete disclosure, not equivalent to a formal patent application. You ran out of money before the appeal. Yes. Simone was quiet for a moment. Someone altered the USPTO filing date, she said. Not a question. Yes. You know who. He looked at her. I've always known who. I just couldn't prove it. Can you? Not alone, not until now. He held her gaze. Can you? My legal team is working on it. She turned the monitor back. We have the abstract. We have the timestamp discrepancy. What we need is the mechanism. Who accessed the filing and when and how the change was made. She paused. There's a name that keeps coming up in the processing record. A patent office examiner who handled 17 Apex submissions over 6 years. An unusual concentration. Wendell Shaw, Deacon said. She looked at him. I know that name, he said. My lawyer tried to depose him during the litigation. He was unavailable. We couldn't afford to push the subpoena. He leaned forward slightly. You found him? I found his name in the processing record. Finding him is the next step. She held his gaze. If he processed the filing and there's evidence of improper access, his testimony would be the mechanism we need. He won't come forward voluntarily. People who've been carrying something for 4 years sometimes do. She said it without particular emphasis. Especially when they start to see that what they've been carrying is about to become visible anyway. Deacon thought about that. About the specific mathematics of a person deciding whether it was safer to step forward or to wait and be found. About the difference between those two things and what each one cost. He nodded once. The job offer, he said. It's still standing. But I want to understand what the division actually is, not the title. What you're building. Simone looked at him steadily. I'm building a team that works the way you worked last night, she said. From the material. From what's actually in front of you, rather than what the simulation says should be there. People who can look at a real problem and find the solution that exists in the real world. She paused. I've been running a company that produces brilliant models of things that don't always work. I want to produce things that work. Deacon was quiet. He thought about the discard bin in the corner of the R&D lab. The silicone damping material that Bernard's team had tested and rejected. Discarded because it didn't fit the theoretical model. Still sitting in the bin. Available. Exactly right for the actual problem. Useful beyond the use it had been assigned. He thought about 4 years of knowing things in rooms where his knowing did not count. I'll think about it, he said. Simone almost smiled. That's what you said this morning. I'm consistent. She reached into the folder on her desk and slid a document across to him. 43 pages. His name on the cover page next to the title, Director, Advanced Experimental Systems Division. He picked it up. There's a provision on page 18, she said. Read it before you sign anything. He left with the contract under his arm and drove back across the city and sat at his kitchen table with the folder open and a cup of coffee that was actually good because he had finally bought decent coffee beans 3 days ago when he decided that some things were worth the extra $4. He read all 43 pages. Page 18 stopped him. The provision was written in clean, precise legal language, which made it no less extraordinary for being clean and precise. It stated that any award resulting from a legal challenge to the Apex Dynamics variable flow valve patent filing, including damages, royalties, or recovered intellectual property rights, would belong exclusively to Deacon Wells as the original inventor of record. She had written this provision into the contract before she had the abstract, before the legal summary, before she had anything that looked like a case. She had written it in on the basis of what she had heard him say at 2 a.m. on a concrete floor in a blast chamber while they were drinking coffee out of paper cups, on the basis of his word and what she had read in the way he carried what had happened to him, and the specific way a person tells the truth when they have been telling it for so long, with nowhere for it to go, that the truth itself has become part of their body. Deacon put the contract down. He looked at his kitchen wall, the window, Seattle outside, doing its afternoon things. A delivery truck double parked on the street below. 2 kids on bikes arguing about something at the corner. Ordinary. All of it ordinary in the way that ordinary only becomes visible when you've been close enough to losing it. He picked up the ballpoint pen from his shirt pocket. Blue ink. Cracked cap. He clicked it once. He read page 18 one more time. Then he turned to the signature page and signed his name. He was putting the cap back on the pen when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't pick up. He had a rule about unknown numbers that had developed during the litigation years when unknown numbers were never good news and were often the specific kind of bad news that required you to sit down before you heard the rest of it. He picked up, Mr. Wells. The voice was male. Older. Something worn into it that wasn't age exactly. More like the sound of a person who has been having a conversation with themselves for a very long time and has finally reached the point where they need someone else in the room. My name is Wendell Shaw. Deacon set his coffee cup down very carefully. I've been reading about Holt Aerospace, Shaw continued. The AX-9 test. Your name came up in a trade brief. I looked you up. A pause. Long. The kind of pause a person takes when they are deciding whether the next sentence is going to change something that cannot be unchanged. I've been waiting for someone to start asking questions again. I had started to think nobody was going to. Deacon looked at his kitchen wall. The calendar. The signed contract on the table in front of him. The ordinary objects of an ordinary room where he had eaten breakfast and made coffee and opened mail and carried a truth for 4 years that had nowhere to go. Mr. Shaw, he said. Start from the beginning, and Wendell Shaw did. He talked for 47 minutes. He talked about the attorney who had approached him 4 years ago, about the amount, $30,000, wired in 2 installments. He talked about the 11 minutes it had taken to alter a timestamp in a federal database using access he had because it was his job, authority that had been trusted to him for 22 years, and he had used it once, on one night, for $30,000, and a reason he could not, looking back, reconstruct into anything that made coherent sense. He talked about going home that night, making dinner, watching television, telling himself it was a small thing, a technical adjustment, numbers on a screen, the kind of rationalization that works for about 6 hours and then starts to leak. He talked about reading the litigation outcome, about seeing the bankruptcy filing, about the specific moment he'd had understood that the numbers on the screen had become a man losing everything, and that understanding was not something he had been able to put back in the place where the rationalization had been. He had kept the wire transfer records on an external hard drive, in a fireproof lockbox under his workbench in the garage. He did not know why he had kept them. Insurance, he had told himself. But insurance was a practical reason, and the reason he had kept them was not practical. He had kept them because throwing them away would have meant he was done carrying it, and he was not done. 4 years and he was not done. Because there is a difference between putting something down and being free of it, and Wendell Shaw had learned, over 4 years of not sleeping well, that the difference was not something he could think his way around. I want to give you the records, Shaw said. His voice had gone rough. Whatever you need, whoever needs them. I should have done this 3 years ago. Deacon kept his voice level. I need you to call a lawyer first, he said. A federal attorney. Independent. Not anyone connected to Apex or Holt. Pause. Then call me back. All right, Mr. Shaw. A pause. I'm glad you called. A long silence on the other end. The kind of silence that a person who has been holding something very heavy makes when someone acknowledges the weight of it for the first time. So am I, Shaw said. Deacon ended the call. He sat at his kitchen table in the specific, cold, precise sensation of a man who has just been handed exactly the right tool for exactly the right job. The table had 3 things on it. His coffee cup, the 43-page contract with his signature on the last page, and the folder from the Apex lawsuit that he had not opened in 2 years. He opened it now. He read through it the way he had read it 100 times during the litigation. Familiar. Every document, every filing date, every deposition summary, every piece of evidence he had brought, and every argument that had been used to bury it. He read it differently now. Not as a record of what had happened to him, as a map of what could be proven and how. Outside, Seattle was doing what it does in the evening, getting quieter in some registers and louder in others. The specific urban sound of a city settling into its nighttime self. He picked up his phone and texted Simone. Shaw called. He has the wire transfer records. He's getting legal counsel tonight. He'll give everything to whoever needs it. 3 seconds. Her reply, I'll have our federal counsel ready by morning. Then, a beat later, how are you? He looked at that question for a moment. 2 words. The fact that she had asked it. The fact that she had waited for a beat before asking it. Like she had decided once to ask, and then almost decided not to, and then asked anyway. He typed back, better than I've been in 4 years. Her reply came after a pause that was just long enough to tell him she had thought about what to say. Good. Get some sleep. The next few weeks are going to be complicated. He put the phone down. He sat in his kitchen and thought about the AX-9, about the resonance loop that had been cracking it from the inside, about the principle of it. That a system vibrating at the wrong frequency does not fail from weakness. It fails from amplification. From the structure of the thing turning against itself, feeding back into itself, growing until the metal gives way, not because it is insufficient but because it is being asked to sustain something it was never designed to hold. He thought about what it means to break a resonance loop. You do not strengthen the casing. You do not add more material. You find the connection between the vibration source and the structure it is destroying. And you break that connection. With something cheap. With something someone else has already thrown away. With something that works not because it is impressive but because it is exactly right for the actual problem in front of you. Wendell Shaw's wire transfer records. His testimony. The metadata in the USPTO filing system that Deacon was already fairly certain, based on what Shaw had described, would show exactly what had been done and when and by whom. Exactly right. He finished his coffee. He looked at the signed contract on the table, page 18. The provision she had written before she had proof. Before she had the abstract or the legal summary, or the name Wendell Shaw, or any of the things that were now beginning to come together like pieces of a structure that had always been there, waiting for the right conditions to become visible. Because it was true, he thought. It was always true. It just needed the right conditions. He put the contract back in its folder. He went to bed, and for the second night in a row, he slept without dreaming about anything at all. 3 weeks passed the way important weeks pass. Fast on the outside. Slow underneath where the real work was happening. Deacon reported to the 31st floor on a Monday morning, wearing the same gray shirt and carrying the same toolbox. Because the contract was signed but the division did not exist yet, and there were still 7 HVAC units in this building that needed attention, and he was still the man responsible for them. He fixed 3 of them before noon. He ate lunch at the same table in the same basement break room where he had eaten lunch for 4 years. He nodded at the same 2 facilities guys who had nodded back at him for 4 years without ever asking his last name. Then he went upstairs and signed the employment paperwork with Deline and received a temporary key card for the 50th floor, which was 2 floors above the 31st, which meant something, though he did not say what it meant out loud to anyone, because there was nobody to say it to, and also because some things are better understood in the body than announced to the room. The 43-page contract sat on his kitchen table for 6 days before he moved it. He put it in the filing cabinet next to the Apex lawsuit folder. Same drawer, different outcome. He thought about that for a moment. Then he closed the drawer and made coffee and went back to work. The legal team moved fast. Faster than he had expected, which meant Simone had given them a deadline, and that deadline was not a suggestion. By the end of the first week, they had confirmed the timestamp discrepancy in the USPTO filing record. By the middle of the second week, they had a preliminary analysis showing that the Apex patent filing date was inconsistent with the original submission metadata. Not provably altered yet, but inconsistent in ways that required explanation, in ways that an innocent filing error could not explain. What they needed was Wendell Shaw. Shaw had called an independent federal attorney on a Wednesday night. He had met with Simone's legal team on a Friday morning. He had walked into that meeting, carrying a fireproof lockbox, and the expression of a man who has been deciding whether to open a door for 4 years, and has finally, for reasons he could not entirely articulate but felt completely, decided that the cost of keeping it closed had become larger than the cost of opening it. He set the lockbox on the table. He unlocked it. Inside, 2 wire transfer records, clean and traceable, showing the movement of $30,000 from an account associated with a law firm that had represented Apex Dynamics in 17 patent filings over 6 years to an account belonging to Wendell Shaw on dates that corresponded precisely with the window in which the USPTO filing had been processed. And one more thing. A printed copy of the original USPTO filing record, before the timestamp was changed, with the original submission date still visible in the document metadata. 4 months and 11 days later than the date that appeared in the official record. Wendell Shaw had printed it the night he made the change. He did not know why he had done that either. Maybe the same reason he kept the wire transfers. Maybe the same reason people preserve evidence of the worst things they have done. Because some part of them, the part that runs underneath the rationalization, knows that what happened needs to exist somewhere in the world in its true form. Even if that somewhere is a fireproof lockbox under a workbench in a garage. Even if nobody ever opens it. Except somebody did. Simone's legal team filed the federal challenge to the Apex patent on a Thursday. The Department of Justice received the documentation package at 11 in the morning. The filing included the timestamp discrepancy analysis, both wire transfer records, Shaw's sworn statement, and a copy of Deacon's original conference abstract with its verified submission date. 14 months before the Apex filing. 14 months. Documented. Verified. Corroborated by a federal witness who was prepared to testify and had the paper trail to back every word. Deacon found out at 11:23, when Simone sent him a text that said filed. Federal counsel confirms receipt. Now we wait. He was on the 31st floor when he read it. Not in the new office. In the R&D lab because the AX-9 was scheduled for its second full-duration burn test, and he wanted to be there when the data came in. He stood at the workbench in the corner and read the text and looked at the AX-9 through the blast glass and thought about the specific sensation of a thing being set in motion that cannot be stopped. Like a frequency that has found its resonance point. Like a loop that has been broken in exactly the right place. 3 days later, Raymond Cross made his move. Deacon heard about it from Simone at 8 in the morning. She called instead of texting, which he had learned in 3 weeks meant the information required tone rather than just content. Apex has proposed a merger, she said. $2.3 billion. Full acquisition structure. Holt as a subsidiary with retained branding for 18 months. He said nothing for a moment. That's generous. It's a trap. Her voice was even. Controlled in the way that controlled things are when they are working hard. He knows we filed. He knows what Shaw gave us. This offer is not about combining companies. It's about acquiring our legal standing before a federal court can act on it. A pause. If Apex owns Holt, our patent challenge becomes an internal dispute between subsidiaries of the same parent company, which changes the legal framework entirely. Deacon understood that immediately, because he had lived in the legal framework of intellectual property litigation for 3 years and understood exactly how the architecture of ownership could be used to bury a claim that would otherwise be heard. Raymond Cross was not offering $2.3 billion to acquire Holt Aerospace technology or its talent or its DoD relationship. He was offering it to acquire Deacon's case and kill it quietly from the inside. He's scared, Deacon said. He's managing risk, which is what scared people do when they're very good at this. What does the board say? A pause. Different quality from the others. 2 members are interested, both of them Pittman's people. They've been told the offer is financially sound and strategically advantageous and that the timing is coincidental. Another pause. It is not coincidental. What do you need? I need the board to understand what Raymond Cross actually is, she said. Not the 30 years of philanthropy and conference keynotes and carefully managed reputation. The actual record. What he did. How he did it. What it cost. She paused. I need them to see it from someone who can speak to it directly. Deacon knew what she was asking before she finished the sentence. A board meeting. Him. In that room. Saying Raymond Cross's name out loud and attaching it to specifics. Wire transfers. Timestamps. A federal witness. Said in a room with financial stakes and 7 people who had the power to accept or reject a $2.3 billion offer that would determine what happened to all of it. He thought about the 4 years of not saying it. About the specific exhaustion of carrying information that has nowhere to go. The weight of a truth that exists but cannot be heard. The way a man can know something completely and still be made to feel uncertain about it by enough institutional pressure applied consistently enough for long enough. He thought about Wendell Shaw opening the lockbox. Monday morning, Deacon said. Emergency session. I'll be there. Thank you, Simone said. Which was not something she said easily or often. He had noticed that in 3 weeks, she did not thank people reflexively. She thanked them when she meant it precisely, and then moved on. Don't thank me yet, he said. Let's see if they listen. She almost said something. He could hear the almost. Then they'll listen. She ended the call. The next morning, Raymond Cross appeared in the lobby of Holt Aerospace. Deacon was not there when it happened. He heard about it from Deline, who told him with the specific professional neutrality of someone who has been trained to describe events without editorializing and finds that training genuinely useful approximately twice a week. Raymond had arrived at 10:45. Told the reception desk he was there for a courtesy visit with an old colleague. Used the tone and the card and the easy confidence of a man who had never once in his adult life been told he could not enter a room he wanted to enter. He had been directed to a waiting area. He had waited 11 minutes. Then a security manager had come down and informed him with professional courtesy that Miss Holt was unavailable today and asked whether he would like to schedule an appointment. He had said he would be in touch, and left. Deacon heard this and understood it immediately. Because Raymond had not come to see Simone. He had come to see what Simone would do when she knew he was in the building. The answer she had sent security, professional, no explanation told him what she wanted him to know, which was, I am not rattled. I am not interested in a conversation. And I am not going to give you a room to work in. Professional courtesy as a weapon. He was starting to understand how she thought. The board meeting was Monday morning. Sunday evening, Deacon took the suit out of the back of his closet. Navy. Single-breasted. He had put it in a garment bag 4 years ago when the possibility of wearing it had become theoretical and had not taken it out since. He put it on in the bathroom mirror. The shoulders were right, the jacket sat clean across his back. He looked like someone he had almost forgotten being. The man who had walked into conference rooms and known what he was talking about, and had been in the right room to say it. He looked at that man for a moment, then he went to bed. Monday morning came in cold and clear. Seattle doing its thing. Sharp air. A sky that looked like it had been scrubbed overnight. The kind of morning that arrives without apology and asks you to match it. Deacon was dressed by 5:30. He drove to the building, parked in the facilities lot out of habit, then stopped halfway to the entrance and thought about it for 3 seconds, then kept walking. Some habits take longer than 3 seconds. He arrived at the 49th floor at 8:45. The Holt Aerospace Executive Conference Room occupied the northeast corner of the floor. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides. The Puget Sound to the west. The city spreading east. A room designed to remind everyone in it that what happened here had consequences extending in every direction you could see from those windows and several you couldn't. 7 board members already seated. Roland Greer at the head of the table, silver-haired, reading something on his tablet, with the contained calm of a man who had seen enough to reserve judgment on most things until he had enough information to form one. The others ranged from carefully neutral to openly skeptical. 2 chairs at the far end sat empty. Reginald Pittman's name was still on the placard in front of one of them. Nobody had moved it. Simone was standing at the window when Deacon walked in. She turned, deep burgundy dress today, structured at the collar, fitted through the body. The fabric had a weight to it that caught the light differently when she moved, which she did. Her silk-pressed hair was down. She looked at him in the suit. Something moved across her face briefly, something that was not professional, and was not performed and was gone almost before it arrived. She nodded once. He nodded back. He took the seat she indicated at the side of the table. Not the head. Not a board member's chair. A chair that said, I am here as someone with information this room needs. I understand the difference between that and being in charge of this room, and I am not here to take anything that isn't mine. Simone took her position at the head. Good morning, she said. I asked for this session because the Apex Dynamics merger proposal requires a response before end of week, and I want this board in possession of complete information before that response is given. She let that settle for 3 seconds. Complete information, Greer said, setting down his tablet. The Apex proposal has been reviewed, Simone said. The financial structure is not what I want to discuss this morning. She looked at Deacon. I want to discuss who Raymond Cross is and what his company is built on. Deacon stood up. He had thought about this moment for a long time. Not consciously, not with intention, but in the way you think about something in the back of a mind that is occupied with other things and keeps returning to the same unfinished sentence. He had imagined courtrooms, depositions, the formal architecture of a legal proceeding where the truth has a specific shape and a specific procedure and gets heard in a specific order. He had not imagined this room, but here it was. So he talked, no notes, no presentation. He stood at the side of a conference table on the 49th floor of a building where he had spent 4 years fixing things below the line of sight, and he told the truth in the plainest language he had, which was very plain. Because he had spent 4 years in a profession that required you to name problems accurately, or they did not get fixed. And because he had spent 4 years before that learning that the most important thing about a technical explanation is that the person receiving it actually understands it. He told them about the variable flow valve system, what it was, what it did, why it mattered to high-cycle propulsion applications, and specifically to the class of engines that both Holt and Apex were currently competing to supply for the NASA payload contract. He told them he had developed it at Meridian Systems before he had ever worked with Apex in any capacity. He told them about the conference abstract, the submission timestamp, the 14-month gap. He told them about Wendell Shaw. He said the name without drama, without editorializing. He said, a USPTO examiner named Wendell Shaw was paid $30,000 by a law firm representing Apex Dynamics to alter the filing timestamp on their patent application by 4 months and 11 days. He has provided wire transfer records and a sworn statement to that effect. He said, the filing date that won Apex their patent, the date that established their claim as prior art, that date was changed, after the fact, by a federal employee, with access to a federal system, on behalf of a company that did not develop this technology first. He said, I have known this for 4 years and could not prove it until now. He placed a copy of the wire transfer records in the center of the table. He placed a copy of Shaw's sworn statement next to it. He placed a copy of his original conference abstract on top of both. Submission timestamp visible. 14 months before the Apex filing date. Verifiable, documented, corroborated. Then he stopped talking. The room was very quiet. Greer was looking at him. Really looking. The way the older man had not looked at him when he walked in. The recalibration of someone who has just received information that changes the category of what they are looking at. The sworn statement from Shaw, Greer said. Submitted to federal authorities, Simone said. Our legal team filed the challenge last Thursday. The Department of Justice received the documentation package at 11 that morning. She paused. We expect formal acknowledgement of the investigation within 10 business days. One of the board members, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had been on the Holt board for 11 years, and who Deacon had identified in the first 5 minutes of the meeting as the person whose opinion would matter most when Greer was deciding which way to move, leaned forward. She had been listening without moving for the entire time Deacon was speaking, the stillness of someone who is processing rather than performing. Mr. Wells, she said, if the patent is invalidated, if the federal challenge succeeds and the original filing is overturned, what happens to the variable flow valve technology? It reverts to its original inventor, Deacon said. To yes. And Apex's current NASA bid, the propulsion system they're proposing using that technology. Their bid loses its primary technical differentiator. The efficiency numbers they're projecting depend on the valve system. Without it, their numbers look like everyone else's. Patricia Osei looked at Simone, then back at Deacon, and Holt Aerospace position in that bid. Deacon looked at Simone. She met his gaze across the table. Steady, unblinking. The expression of someone who has already made the calculation and is waiting to see if everyone else arrives at the same place. That, she said, is what the Advanced Experimental Systems Division is for. The room erupted. Not panic. The specific noise of 7 people who have just received a significant amount of information and have strong professional opinions about what to do with it and are not yet in agreement about which opinion is correct. Simone let it run for 45 seconds, which Deacon suspected was a very specific and deliberate 45 seconds, long enough for people to feel they had spoken, short enough that it did not become something she would have to recover from. Then she raised one hand. The room settled. The merger proposal from Apex is not a business opportunity, she said. It is a defensive acquisition designed to absorb our legal standing before the federal investigation can reach a verdict. Accepting it would transfer control of this company's R&D output to the organization currently under federal investigation for the fraud that made that R&D necessary in the first place. She looked at each person around the table in turn, unhurried, like she had time and the room did not. I am recommending we reject the proposal. Authorize the legal challenge and approve the Advanced Experimental Systems Division with Director Wells at the compensation level already documented in his employment contract. Greer looked at the documents in the center of the table. He looked at Patricia Osei. He looked at Deacon. The investigation timeline, he said. Realistically, 6 to 12 months for the initial phase, Simone said. The wire transfers are clean and traceable. The metadata corroboration is technical, not testimonial. It does not depend on Shaw's credibility alone. It depends on the integrity of a federal digital record, which is not something anyone's personal history can undermine. Greer nodded slowly. Apex will fight the challenge, he said. Of course they will. Simone's voice was level. Raymond Cross has 30 years of practice fighting things. He is very good at it. We are better prepared than he expected us to be, which means he will be reacting rather than planning. People make worse decisions when they're reacting. 2 board members pushed back. Hard. Resource allocation. Legal exposure. The risk of a prolonged federal proceeding while the company was trying to execute a decontract and position for a NASA bid simultaneously. They were not wrong to raise it. They were raising it from a position that did not include the full weight of what had just been placed on the center of the table, and Simone addressed each concern with the specific patience of someone who has already done this calculation and has more information than the person she is reassuring. Greer asked 4 questions. The kind of questions that are not challenges but confirmations. The questions of someone who is already moving toward a decision and is verifying the structure before committing weight to it. At 11:15, the vote. 5-2. Reject the merger proposal. Authorize the federal legal action against the Apex patent filing. Approve the Advanced Experimental Systems Division with Deacon Wells as director. The 2 dissenting votes were the board members Pittman had placed. They knew before the meeting ended that their own positions were under review. One of them looked at Deacon when the vote was confirmed, not with hostility, with the expression of a person who has just understood something they wish they had understood earlier. Pittman's placard was still on the empty chair at the end of the table. Deacon looked at it once. Then he gathered his documents and stood. Patricia Osei looked at him as he pushed back his chair. Direct. Settled. The look of someone who has decided to trust a person and is comfortable with the decision. He nodded to her. She nodded back. He walked out of the conference room. He did not look at Simone on his way to the door because she was already looking at Greer and managing the next 30 seconds of the room, and he understood that he did not need her to look at him. The thing that had just happened was between him and the truth and the documents on the table and a federal system that was now in motion. It did not require her attention in this particular moment. He took the elevator down to the lobby. He pushed through the glass doors and stood on the sidewalk outside Holt Aerospace in the cold morning air and just breathed. The city moved around him. Traffic. People. A delivery driver double-parked across the street arguing with someone on a phone. 2 women passing with coffee cups, talking about something that made one of them laugh. A man on a bicycle cutting through the intersection at a speed that suggested confidence in his own reflexes. Ordinary. All of it ordinary. Going on without comment, without acknowledgement that anything significant had just occurred 17 feet from where it was happening. Deacon stood in the middle of it and felt the weight shifting. Not gone. Some weights do not go. They just change form. From carried to set down, and the difference between those 2 states is enormous. It is the difference between a man defined by what was done to him and a man who has simply lived through something and come out on the other side, still himself. His phone buzzed. Simone. 3 words. Good work today. He looked at it for a moment. Type back, that's a low bar. 3 seconds. Her response, you cleared it significantly. He almost smiled. Almost. He put the phone in his pocket and walked back to his car and drove across the city and sat in his apartment for 20 minutes just sitting, which was something he had not done in a long time. Just sitting. Not planning, not calculating, not carrying anything toward the next place it needed to go. Just letting the morning exist in its aftermath. Then his phone rang, unknown number. He picked up. Mr. Wells. The voice was older. Female. Careful. My name is Andrea Fitch. I'm a reporter with the Seattle Business Journal. We've received information about a federal challenge to an Apex Dynamics patent filing. I understand your name is associated with the original invention. Would you be willing to comment? Deacon said nothing for a moment. How did you get this number? I'd rather not say. I'd rather you did. A pause. We received a tip. From someone inside Apex, we believe. He thought about that. Raymond Cross naming him publicly. Trying to make him the story instead of the company. Trying to put him on defense, explaining himself, reacting, while Raymond managed the narrative from position of institutional authority and 30 years of carefully curated reputation. The same move. Different instrument. I have no comment at this time, Deacon said. The federal filing is a matter of public record, Mr. Wells. The story will run regardless. Then it will run without my comment. He ended the call. He sat with the phone in his hand and looked at his kitchen wall. The calendar. The coffee maker. the closed filing cabinet drawer. He thought about what Raymond was doing and why, and what it meant that he was doing it now. 3 days after the federal filing, the same week as the board meeting, Raymond knew. He had known from the moment Pittman told him about the vote, about the documents on the table, about Wendell Shaw's name being said out loud in a board meeting with 7 witnesses and a secretary taking minutes. He was not panicking. He was restructuring. Which meant the next several weeks were going to require Deacon to do something he had not needed to do in 4 years, which was pay very careful attention to what was moving around him and make decisions about how to move in response without losing the thread of what he was actually trying to accomplish. He was not, he thought, particularly worried about this, because Raymond Cross had spent 4 years operating under the assumption that Deacon Wells was a broken instrument, someone who had been processed and filed under past and was not going to generate new complications. That assumption had just been updated, and Raymond, for all his 30 years of practice, was now in the position of reacting to new information, rather than working from a plan he had designed in advance, which was, as Simone had observed, where people made worse decisions. Deacon put his phone on the table. He stood up, stretched the creak out of his lower back, and went to make coffee. Real coffee. The kind that cost $4 extra and was worth it. He thought about the contract in the filing cabinet. Page 18. The provision written before there was proof, before Shaw, before the legal team's analysis, before any of the things that were now in motion. Written because it was true. He thought about what kind of person does that. Locks the protection into the document before they have evidence they can win, before they can be certain the truth will be heard. Written on the basis of sitting on a cold floor at 2 a.m. and hearing a man tell his story in the specific way that people tell the truth when they have been telling it for so long, with nowhere for it to go that it has become part of their structure. The coffee brewed. He poured a cup. He stood at the kitchen window and watched his neighborhood do its afternoon things. A man walking a dog who was deeply committed to investigating a particular patch of sidewalk. Kids on bikes. A neighbor across the street hanging something on a porch that the wind immediately had opinions about. His phone buzzed again. Simone Apex's attorneys filed an injunction this afternoon, trying to block the patent challenge on procedural grounds. First move, standard delay tactic. He replied. Expected her response, yes. Our federal counsel says it won't hold, but it buys them time. How much time? 30 to 60 days. Maybe. A pause. Then her, are you all right? He looked at that question. It was the second time she had asked him something like that, directly, without the buffer of professional context or task-related framing. Just the question itself, standing in the open, asking for an honest answer. He typed back, I'm good. Better every day. Her reply took a moment. Then, that's the right direction. He put the phone down. Outside, the afternoon was doing what Seattle afternoons do in the weeks before winter properly arrives. Getting dark earlier than it should. The quality of light going amber and then gray, and then something that was not quite either. The city settling into its evening self. Deacon drank his coffee. He thought about Monday, about the boardroom and the documents and the vote and the specific weight of saying Raymond Cross's name out loud in a room where it could do something, about the difference between knowing a truth and being heard saying it, about how long he had carried the distance between those two things, about the fact that the distance was closing, not gone yet, but closing. He rinsed his cup, changed out of the suit, hung it back up, not in the garment bag this time, just on the hanger, available for the next time it was needed, which it would be. He was not done with rooms like that one. He was, if anything, just starting. He sat back down at the kitchen table with a notepad and a pen and began making a list of the 8 people he was going to call this week about positions on his new team. Each name was someone he had crossed paths with in the last 4 years in facilities corridors, in vendor meetings, in the brief professional intersections that happened at the margins of industries that had rooms like this one and rooms like the 31st floor and not enough conversation between them. People he had noticed. People who had noticed things. People who had answers to questions that weren't being asked in the right rooms yet. He wrote down 8 names. He would need to meet with each of them individually. He already knew what he was going to ask. Not their credentials. Not their degree programs. Not their publication records. He was going to ask them about a discard bin, about the last time they had solved a problem with something someone else had thrown away. He was fairly certain all 8 of them would have an answer. He drew a circle around the first name on the list. Outside Seattle went on doing what it did. Indifferent, relentless. Carrying its 10,000 lives in 10,000 registers simultaneously. None of them stopping to acknowledge that something significant had just been set in motion in a kitchen in Beacon Hill, by a man in a plain shirt at a kitchen table, with a notepad and a pen, and a very specific understanding of how to work with the actual material in front of him, rather than the theoretical version of what it was supposed to be. Deacon put the cap on the pen. He looked at the list for a moment. Then he folded the paper, put it in his shirt pocket and went to bed. So tomorrow was going to require him to be rested. And the day after tomorrow, and the one after that. He was not, turned out, worried about any of them. 2 months after the board meeting, Apex Dynamics filed a motion to dismiss the federal patent challenge on procedural grounds. Their legal team was good, expensive and precise, and very good at finding angles that made a legitimate claim look like a paperwork problem. The motion cited 3 separate procedural deficiencies in the original filing. All of them technical. All of them the kind of thing that sounds like bureaucratic noise to a non-lawyer, and sounds like a serious problem to a judge who cares about process. The judge cared about process. She granted a 60-day review period, which meant 60 days of nothing moving. 60 days of the case sitting in a procedural holding pattern, while Apex's attorneys worked the next angle, and Shaw's testimony sat in a sealed federal file, and the wire transfer records that should have been sufficient on their own were not quite sufficient on their own, because the chain of evidence had a gap in it. The gap was this. The wire transfers showed money moving from an Apex associated account to Wendell Shaw. Shaw's testimony explained what the money was for, but testimony from someone with Shaw's financial history, the gambling debts, the years of managed but not fully resolved credit problems was vulnerable. Apex knew it was vulnerable, and they had spent the first 30 days of the review period building the argument that Wendell Shaw was not a credible witness, that his sworn statement was the account of a man with a documented pattern of poor financial decisions who was now attempting to shift blame for his own misconduct onto a company that had done nothing wrong. It was a good argument. Deacon heard it laid out by Simone's lead federal attorney on a Tuesday afternoon in a conference room on the 48th floor. He listened without moving. Let the problem land completely before he started working on it. That was how he approached everything. A problem you have fully understood is already halfway solved. A problem you start solving before you understand it will surprise you at the worst possible moment. The attorney finished her summary. Silence. The metadata, Deacon said. The attorney looked at him. The USPTO filing record. When the timestamp was changed, the change was made in a live federal database. That kind of edit doesn't happen without a trace. Every system access gets logged. Every document modification gets recorded. Not just in the document itself. In the system that holds the document. He paused. Did we pull the system access logs? Not the filing metadata. The database access logs. The record of who logged into the system, when and what they touched while they were in it. A silence. Longer this time. Those logs are held by the USPTO's internal IT infrastructure, the attorney said carefully. Which is a federal system, yes. Which we can subpoena, we can request them. The request would need to go through the court. It would require the judge to order the USPTO to produce them. She paused. Given the nature of the case, federal employee misconduct, integrity of a federal record, there's an argument for an expedited hearing on the request. Then let's make that argument, Deacon said. Because if those logs show Shaw's credentials accessing the Apex patent file on the same day the wire transfer cleared, that is not testimony. That is a federal digital record. You cannot attack a federal digital record by arguing that the person whose credentials appear in it has a gambling problem. The attorney looked at him. Then she looked at Simone. Simone was looking at Deacon with an expression that was not surprise. It was recognition. The look of a person watching someone do exactly what they are built to do, and finding that it still lands even when she already knew it was coming. File the request today, she said to the attorney. Expedited. Make the federal integrity argument. The attorney nodded and left. The room was quiet for a moment. How did you know the logs would still exist? Simone asked. Federal systems archive access logs for a minimum of 7 years, Deacon said. I fixed a federal building server room once. Subcontractor work 3 years ago. The archivist told me about the retention policy while I was replacing a cooling unit. He paused. I remembered it. Simone looked at him for a moment. Of course you did, she said. The expedited request was filed that afternoon. The judge, persuaded by the argument that the integrity of a federal record was at stake, granted it within the week. The USPTO produced the access logs under court order 11 days later, and there it was. Wendell Shaw's federal employee credentials, accessing the Apex Dynamics patent file. Not once, 3 times, over 2 days. The first access on the date the wire transfer cleared. The second 18 hours later, consistent with someone returning to verify the change had taken effect. The third access 4 days after that, consistent with a man checking one more time to make sure the record looked the way it needed to look. 3 accesses, all logged by the federal system itself, all tied to credentials issued to Wendell Shaw and only Wendell Shaw by the USPTO's Internal Security Office. And underneath each access log, the system had automatically captured what changed in the file during each session, including the timestamp field, including the value before the modification and the value after. The difference between those 2 values was 4 months and 11 days. Documented not by Shaw's testimony, not by a witness whose credibility could be attacked, by the federal system that had hosted the alteration, by the agency's own servers recording in real time what had been done and when and by whose credentials. Deacon's attorney called him at 7:14 on a Thursday morning. He was in the lab, standing at his workbench with the new valve assembly in front of him, a set of calipers in his right hand, a cup of coffee at his elbow that had been hot 20 minutes ago. He listened for 4 minutes without speaking. Then, "Send me the logs." He read them at the workbench. Calipers still in his hand. Coffee still going cold. The morning coming through the narrow windows of the 31st floor in that particular Seattle way gray first, then slowly deciding. He read them twice. He put the calipers down. He sent Simone a text, 3 words, "We have it." Her response came in 40 seconds, which was fast even for her, which told him she had been waiting for exactly this message since the moment the subpoena request was filed. Her response was also 3 words. "Come upstairs now." He took the elevator to the 49th floor. She was standing when he walked in, not at her desk, at the center of the room, phone in hand, already reading something. She was wearing a dress the color of strong coffee today, fitted through the waist, the fabric moving when she turned toward him, her hair down, one side tucked behind her ear. She looked like a woman who had slept 4 hours and was not going to mention it. She held out her hand. He gave her his phone with the attorney's forwarded email open. She read. Fast. The way she always read, processing at a speed that other people experienced as settling until they realized it wasn't impatience. It was just how her mind worked. She lowered the phone. 3 accesses, she said. 3. The system captured the before and after values, every field, including the timestamp. She was quiet for a moment. This isn't Shaw's word against Raymond's lawyers, no. This is the federal government's own record of what happened in its own database, yes. She handed the phone back. She walked to the window. Not the Puget Sound window, the east-facing one. The one that looked out over the city rather than the water. She stood there with her arms crossed and looked at Seattle for a moment in the way people look at something when they are actually looking inward. Then she turned. Raymond is going to try to get ahead of this, she said. He'll issue a statement before we can. Frame it as a competitive dispute, politically motivated, the usual. She paused. I want to call the press conference first this afternoon. That's aggressive. He'll respond, I know. I want him responding to us. He spent 30 years setting the terms of every conversation about this company and every conversation about himself. She looked at Deacon directly. I want him reacting for once. Deacon thought about Raymond Cross on the sidewalk outside the federal building 2 months ago. The charcoal overcoat, the single aide at a respectful distance. The careful warmth of a man who had practiced warmth long enough that it had stopped feeling like practice. He thought about what Simone had said then. That people make worse decisions when they're reacting. Do it, he said. She pressed a button on her desk phone before he finished the sentence. Deline. Clear my afternoon. Press conference at 3. Main lobby. Call federal counsel and have her available by phone from 2:30. She released the button. Looked at Deacon. You should be there, I'll be there. The press conference lasted 14 minutes. Simone stood at a podium in the Holt Aerospace lobby with the building's glass and steel architecture behind her and said, in language that was clear and precise and contained not one unnecessary word, that Holt Aerospace had provided the Department of Justice with documentary evidence of federal patent fraud by Apex Dynamics, that the evidence included financial records, a sworn witness statement, and federal database access logs produced under court order from the USPTO itself, that the company was cooperating fully with the ongoing federal investigation. She did not use Raymond Cross's name. She did not need to. She answered 5 questions from reporters. Each answer was calibrated. 1 sentence longer than the question required. 2 sentences shorter than it could have been. She thanked them. She walked away from the podium without looking back. Deacon watched from the edge of the lobby. He watched her handle those 14 minutes the way she handled everything. Complete control of pace. Complete control of what was released and what was held back. The story got exactly what it needed to run and nothing it could use against her. He thought about a woman who had been fighting to hold on to something her father built since she was 28 years old, who had learned in those 6 years exactly how much information to give a room and exactly when to stop giving it. She had been doing this her whole life. He just hadn't been in a position to see it until now. Apex stocks dropped 7% by close of trading that afternoon. By the following Friday, 11. Reginald Pittman resigned from the Holt Aerospace board on a Wednesday morning. Quietly, a single paragraph sent to Roland Greer's office, citing personal reasons and a desire to pursue other opportunities. No press release, no statement. Just a paragraph and a cleared office by noon. Simone told Deacon about it in passing 2 sentences in the hallway outside the lab, between one meeting and the next. She said it the way she said things that were settled, factually, without emphasis. Already looking at what came after. Pittman's out, she said. Greer accepted the resignation this morning. That's clean, Deacon said. It is. She paused. His compliance review found 3 years of communications with Raymond's team. Everything we suspected. He knew what he was doing and he did it anyway. She looked at Deacon. Some people make a choice once and spend the rest of their lives paying for it. Some people make it over and over again. She paused. Pittman was the second kind. She moved on down the hallway. Deacon stood there for a moment. He thought about Wendell Shaw, who had made one choice on one night for $30,000 and had not slept well in 4 years. Who had kept the wire transfer records in a fireproof box in his garage, because some part of him, the part that ran underneath the rationalizing, had always known that what he'd done needed to exist somewhere in its true form. 2 people. 2 choices. Same category of wrong. Completely different relationship with the weight of it afterward. He went back to work. 3 weeks after the press conference, the Department of Justice announced the formal investigation into Apex Dynamics. The announcement was a single paragraph in a Federal Register notice that would have meant nothing to most people and everything to anyone paying attention to aerospace contracting. Apex stock fell 14% in one session. The NASA Procurement Office sent a formal inquiry to Apex Dynamics requesting full documentation of the proprietary basis for the variable flow valve claims in their bid submission, which was, in the language of federal procurement, a way of saying, "We are looking at your filing very carefully, and we need you to explain yourself." Raymond Cross called a press conference. Deacon watched it on the screen in his own office, the 50th floor office with his name on the door, and the west-facing window with the view he still had not fully stopped noticing when he walked in. He watched alone. He had not asked Simone to watch it with him. This was something he needed to see by himself. Raymond was composed, authoritative, dark suit, the kind of tie that communicates seriousness without effort. He spoke for 9 minutes about Apex's 30-year commitment to American aerospace innovation, about the importance of protecting intellectual property in a competitive environment, about the dangers of allowing legally motivated challenges to disrupt industry leadership. He did not mention Deacon Wells by name, which was the most important thing about the 9 minutes, because 2 months ago he had, in the PR statement, calling Deacon a person with a contested professional record, and someone since then had advised him not to do that again. Someone in Raymond's circle had understood that naming Deacon specifically was giving him a platform and a narrative that Raymond could not control. Smart advice. Given about 6 weeks too late, Deacon turned off the screen. He sat in his office for a moment with the Puget Sound visible through the west window. Gray-green in the afternoon. The mountains clear. The city between him and the water doing what cities do, constant, indifferent, carrying its thousands of lives without acknowledgement that anything had just changed. He thought about Raymond Cross. Not with satisfaction. Not with anger. With the specific clarity of a man who has finally seen the full shape of something he has only ever seen pieces of, and found that the full shape is exactly what he thought it was, which is both vindicating and somehow less dramatic than he had expected. Raymond had not been a monster. He had been a man who found leverage and used it, and told himself that was just business, and then built 30 years of keynote speeches and philanthropy on top of that foundation, and believed, genuinely believed, that the foundation had solidified into something legitimate over time. It hadn't. Foundations are what they are. The weight you put on top of them doesn't change what they're made of. Deacon stood up. He went back to the lab. The interviews for the new team had been happening in parallel with everything else. 8 candidates, each one recommended by someone who had worked alongside them at some point in the previous decade, in settings that had very little in common, except that in each of them the person had apparently done something no one had thought to value at the time. He met them one at a time in his office. After the technical discussion, after the background, after the normal shape of a hiring conversation had been completed, he asked each of them the same question. Tell me about the last time you solved a problem with something someone else had already thrown away. 8 conversations, 8 answers, all different in the details, all similar in something underneath the details. The quality of people who had been looking at problems from angles the system around them had not validated, who had found solutions in places the system was not designed to look, and who had, almost universally, learned not to lead with those solutions in rooms that would not receive them. He recognized that. He hired all 8. Priya was the third one he interviewed. She had been working in materials testing at a mid-size aerospace supplier for 4 years. She told him, when he asked his question, about the time she had fixed a calibration drift in a pressure sensor using a cut rubber band and a strip of copper tape, because the proper replacement component was back-ordered 6 weeks and the test window could not wait. She told it the way people tell stories about things they are mildly embarrassed by quickly, with a small self-deprecating shrug at the end. Did it work? He asked. Held for 11 months, she said, until we got the actual part. He hired her on the spot. She was also, as it turned out, the best materials analyst on the team, which he had suspected from the rubber band story, because the rubber band story told him something about how she thought that her publication record did not. The new team settled into the lab over the following 2 weeks. 8 people and 8 workstations and a materials library along the south wall that Deacon had assembled himself over 6 weeks, sourced partly from standard suppliers and partly from the kind of specialty vendors that only people who have spent years working with real materials rather than simulated ones know to call. The work was good. It was good in the way that work is good when the people doing it have been waiting, without knowing they were waiting, for a context in which their actual capabilities were what the job required rather than a liability to be managed. They did not need to be told to stay late. They stayed because the problems were interesting and the lab was the right place to be, and nobody was going to come in at 9 a.m. and run the same failed model for the 14th time. Deacon did not say any of this out loud. He did not need to. The valve assembly on his workbench was nearing completion. The new design had been developing for 4 years in the back of a mind occupied with other things, which meant it had developed without the constraints of a project deadline or a budget review or a department head who needed it to look a certain way on paper before it could look any other way in practice. It had developed in the specific freedom of a thought that has nowhere to go and so goes wherever the problem actually leads. The result was significantly better than the original, not incrementally, significantly, in ways that he was still occasionally surprised by when he ran the numbers, because the numbers kept coming back cleaner than he expected, which meant the 4 years had not been wasted time. They had been, in some way he had not planned and would not have chosen, development time. The problem kept going in the place where it was built, which was not a filing document or a patent portfolio. It was his mind, and when the conditions were finally right, it came out further along than where it had been when it left. On a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the team came together, Priya looked up from her station at 9:47 a.m. and said, without particular drama, 72 hours were at benchmark. The stress test had been running continuously at full operating load. No variance, no degradation, every sensor holding exactly where it needed to hold. Deacon walked over and looked at the readout. He looked at it for a moment. "Save the data," he said. "Full dataset, I want everything from the first hour to now." "Already saving," Priya said. He initialed the test log. Standard procedure. He signed his name next to the timestamp and the test designation and the result, which was a single word in a federal form field, pass. He straightened up. He looked at his team, 3 of them still at their stations. The others having filtered in over the past hour as word spread through the lab that the numbers were holding. 8 people who had each, at some point in their careers, solved a problem with something someone else had thrown away. Standing in a lab that had been rebuilt from the ground up to make exactly that kind of thinking not just acceptable but required. "Good work," he said, which was all he said, because it was enough. Because they knew what it meant and he knew they knew, and adding more words would have made the moment smaller rather than larger. He went back to his workstation. He sat down and looked at the valve assembly. Then he looked at the design schematic pinned to the board above the bench. He picked up a pencil and made a small notation in the margin, a refinement he had been considering for 3 days, and had just, in the last 10 minutes, understood was correct. Not from running the calculation. From holding the physical object in his hands, while the test numbers came in and feeling, in the way that hands feel things after 20 years of working with real materials, that the geometry was slightly off in one place, and he knew how to correct it. He wrote the notation. He looked at it. Then he pulled out his phone and sent Simone a text. 72 hours. Benchmark confirmed. Her response came in 30 seconds. Conference room. 20 minutes. And bring the schematic. He almost smiled. Almost. He took the schematic off the board and rolled it under his arm and took the elevator up 2 floors. The conference room was the west-facing one. The one with the Puget Sound visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass. Simone was already there when he walked in. Standing at the window with her back to him, looking at the water. She had changed since the morning, the coffee-colored dress replaced by something the shade of dark plum, fitted at the waist. The kind of garment that managed to look simultaneously like serious business and like she had chosen it because she wanted to. Her hair was down, pulled back on one side with something small and gold. 2 glasses on the table. A bottle he recognized this time. She had served it once before, at a dinner with the DoD liaison team, and he had made a mental note because it was the kind of wine that people serve when the occasion matters, and they want the occasion to know it. She turned when she heard him come in. 72 hours, she said. Clean across the board. No variance in the final 18. She picked up the bottle, poured 2 glasses, set the bottle down, held 1 glass out. He took it. She looked at the rolled schematic under his arm. "Is that what I think it is?" "The 3rd version. Maybe the 4th. He set it on the table. "I lost count somewhere in year 2. She unrolled it, held it flat with both hands, and looked at it the way she had looked at the code on the control booth screen the night of the AX-9 test. Actually reading. Not performing interest. Reading. "This is different from the original filing," she said. "Significantly." "How significantly?" "The efficiency numbers Apex was projecting in their NASA bid. The ones that made their proposal look competitive." He paused. "This beats them by about 18% under operating load." She looked up at him. 18%. At sustained cycle. More in the first 30 seconds of spool. She looked back at the schematic. She was quiet for a moment. And in the quiet, he could see her doing what she always did, running the calculation. The full one. All the downstream implications. The board implications. The NASA implications. The what this means for everything implications in the time it took most people to pour a drink. "The NASA briefing is in 3 weeks," she said. "I know. I want you to present this yourself, not through the legal team, not through communications." She looked at him. "Your work, your name attached to it in the room where it matters." He thought about rooms. About the room on the 31st floor where he had set a toolbox down on a concrete floor and said a number. About the boardroom on this floor where he had stood without notes and said Raymond Cross's name out loud and attached it to specifics. About the rooms he had moved through for 4 years. Fixing what broke and disappearing before anyone thought to ask who he was. And this room, with a glass of good wine and a schematic on the table, and a woman looking at him like the calculation she had run had come out exactly as she hoped. "I'll be there," he said. She raised her glass slightly. He raised his. They did not clink, just raised them toward each other, which felt like exactly the right amount of ceremony for what had just been accomplished, and exactly the right amount of restraint for two people who were still, in some ways, figuring out what they were to each other. They both turned to the window. The Puget Sound below. The Olympic range on the far side, clear today, the upper ridges holding the last of the season's snow. The city between them and the water, the buildings and the bridges and the 10,000 lives being conducted in the spaces between. All of it going on without comment. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." Page 18. She did not say anything, just waited. "You wrote that provision before you had the abstract, before the legal summary, before Shaw, before the access logs, before any of it." He looked at the water. "You had nothing but what I told you on a concrete floor at 2 in the morning. "Yes." "Why?" She was quiet for a moment that was longer than her usual pauses. The kind of quiet that means a person is deciding not whether to answer but how to answer in a way that is true without being more than the moment requires. "My father used to say," she began and then stopped. Started again differently. "When I was 12, he brought me into the first lab he ever built, the one in the garage before this building existed. There was an engine on the workbench that he'd been working on for 2 years. It wasn't finished. It wasn't running yet. And he put his hand on it and said, 'This is real. Whatever anyone tells you about it, whatever a room full of people decides about it, the thing itself knows what it is.'" She paused. "He meant it about the engine. But he didn't only mean it about the engine." Deacon looked at her. "I knew what you were when you set that toolbox down," she said. "Not the resume, not the lawsuit, the thing itself." She held his gaze. The provision was just the paperwork catching up to what was already true. He did not say anything for a moment. He thought about a man on a ladder 17 feet above a polished concrete floor, listening to a machine die in a pattern he recognized, and choosing, for 41 minutes, to say nothing. Because saying nothing was the arrangement. Because the arrangement had been in place for 4 years and had cost him everything it was going to cost him, and he had learned to carry the cost the way you carry things that are not going to change. And then he had set the toolbox down. And one person in that room had heard the sound it made and understood what it meant. "Your father," Deacon said. "He would have understood what was wrong with that machine. Immediately," she said. "Without hesitation. He would have walked in, listened for 30 seconds, and told you before you finished the sentence. I would have liked to meet him." She smiled. "Not the controlled one. Not the dangerous one. The quiet one, the real one that arrived without announcement and was gone almost before it finished. He would have liked you," she said. "He was always more interested in the man who could hear the problem than the man who could explain why solving it was complicated." They stood at the window. The light was going amber at the edges of the city, the water below shifting from gray-green to something darker as the afternoon moved toward evening. The kind of light that makes a city look like it means something, which is not how cities actually work but is how they feel from 49 floors up at the end of a day that has gone the way today went. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. "Priya, final dataset compiled and filed. Full documentation. Ready for patent submission whenever you say." He showed it to Simone without thinking. The way you show something to a person who is standing next to you when it makes you want to share it. Not as information, just as the thing itself. She read it. The quiet smile again. "Brief, real, gone. Whenever you say," she repeated. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. He finished his wine, set the glass down, rolled the schematic back up. He was about to leave when she said his name. Not Miss Holt tone, not CEO tone, just his name. He looked back. She was still at the window. The dark plum dress against the last of the afternoon light. The water behind her. The mountains. The sky going amber. And then the color that comes after amber. The color Seattle does in the last minutes before dark. That doesn't have a proper name, but that people who live there recognize immediately. "Page 31, she said. He looked at her. "Of the contract, in the intellectual property section," she held his gaze. "Any patent filed by the Advanced Experimental Systems Division, using technology developed by its director, carries the director's name as primary inventor, not the company's." Filing, a pause. His name. First, he had read 43 pages. He had read them carefully. But he had read page 31 as standard IP boilerplate, the kind of language that appears in every employment contract in this industry, and had moved past it because his attention had been on page 18. He had not read it as something she had written specifically for him, before she had proof. "You didn't mention that when I signed," he said. "No. Why not?" She looked at him steadily. "I needed to know if you'd sign without it." He thought about that. About a person who structures things in layers. Who does not reveal everything at once, not because she is withholding, but because she understands that information lands differently depending on when it arrives and what it lands next to. Who puts the protection in before she has evidence, and puts the additional layer in quietly and waits to see what the person does when they think they only have the first. "And," he said, "and you signed." The controlled smile just at the edge, which told me what I needed to know about whether the $50,000 was ever the point. It hadn't been, he had known that. But it was different, hearing it named out loud, in this room, by the person who had been watching him long enough to see it clearly. "The patent," he said. "When we file tomorrow, my name." "First," she said, the way it should have been the first time. He nodded once. She nodded back. He left. He walked down the hall and took the elevator to the 31st floor and came back into the lab. His team was still there, 5 of them now, Priya and 4 others. The kind of people who are still at their stations at 6 in the evening, not because anyone asked them to be, but because the work is the kind of work that is more interesting than going home. He sat down at his bench. He looked at the valve assembly, the completed thing, clean in its way, not elegant by the standards of the people who design things to be presented in conference rooms, elegant by the standard of the actual problem it was designed to solve, which is a different kind of elegance and in Deacon's experience the more durable one. He picked up his pencil and the schematic and wrote the notation he had made earlier in a cleaner hand. Then he wrote 3 more small refinements that had been clarifying over the course of the afternoon and had reached the point where he trusted them enough to commit them to paper. He pinned the schematic back to the board. He looked at it. His name would be on the filing tomorrow. Primary inventor. First, in a federal system that would record it correctly this time, without anyone with the credentials and the motive to go back in and change it afterward. Because this time the system would be watching for that. Because this time, there was a federal investigation underway that had made clear to everyone with access to federal patent records exactly what happened to people who misused that access. Raymond Cross had issued a statement on a Tuesday. By Thursday, he had gone quiet. By the following Monday, he had resigned as CEO of Apex Dynamics, in a statement 4 sentences long that mentioned none of the relevant facts by name. By Thursday of that week, he was reported to be cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for considerations that had not yet been disclosed publicly, but that everyone in the industry had already privately calculated. The investigation would take time. Federal investigations always did, but the direction of it was no longer in question. The access logs had made the direction a settled matter. Everything else was just the formal process catching up to what the evidence had already established. Deacon did not spend much time thinking about Raymond Cross. He had spent 4 years thinking about Raymond Cross in the specific way that people think about the person who took something from them constantly, involuntarily, the thought, arriving at irregular intervals, without invitation and requiring effort to set aside. That kind of thinking was not something he had controlled. It was something the situation had imposed. The situation had changed. He thought about the work instead. He thought about the NASA briefing in 3 weeks. About standing in a room full of procurement officials and presenting a valve system that beat the competing proposal by 18% under operating load, with his name on the documentation and a federal investigation underway that would shortly make clear why the competing proposal had seemed more advanced than it actually was. He thought about what it would feel like to be in that room. Not triumph, not vindication. He kept expecting those feelings, and they kept not arriving in the form he expected. What arrived instead was something quieter, something that felt more like being returned to than like winning, like a version of himself that had been in cold storage for 4 years, preserved without his knowledge in the back of a mind that had been doing other things, coming back to operating temperature. Still the same version, just ready. He worked until 8, made a notation, checked the data one more time, shut down his station. He told Priya to send the complete dataset to the patent attorney in the morning. She said she already had the email drafted. He said good. She went back to whatever she was doing. He did not ask, because she was doing exactly what she should be doing, and the question would have been redundant. He took the elevator down to the lobby. He stood on the sidewalk in the night air. Seattle at 8 in the evening, a different register from the morning. The specific sounds of a city that has shifted from its daytime self into whatever it becomes after dark, not quieter exactly, just differently occupied. Someone's music from a car at a red light 2 blocks over. The cable car bell. The wind off the water, which was not visible from here, but which made itself felt anyway, the way large bodies of water make themselves felt even from a distance. He put his hands in his pockets and stood there for a moment. He thought about what Simone had said, about her father's hand on an unfinished engine. This is real. Whatever anyone tells you about it, whatever a room full of people decides about it, the thing itself knows what it is. Deacon had known what he was. For 4 years, in a gray shirt with a facilities badge and a cart, he pushed through hallways where nobody met his eyes. He had known. The knowing had not made it easier, but it had made it survivable, because there is a difference between a thing that is broken and a thing that is waiting, and Deacon had never, in 4 years, confused himself for the first kind. He had been the second kind the whole time. Waiting for the conditions, he pulled out his phone. One unread text from Simone, sent 20 minutes ago. Patent attorney confirmed for tomorrow at 10. I'll be in the meeting. He typed back, I know. 3 seconds. Her response, that's not a question. He looked at that for a moment. Typed back, I know that too. A longer pause this time. Long enough that he had already put the phone back in his pocket when it buzzed again. Get some sleep. Tomorrow your name goes on something that's been yours since before anyone tried to tell you otherwise. He stood on the sidewalk and held the phone and did not immediately reply. Because some things do not need a reply. Because some things are complete as they are. The way a valve assembly is complete when every component is in the right relationship to every other component, and the thing finally does what it was always designed to do. He put the phone away. He walked to his car. He drove home through the lit streets of the city with the window cracked and the night air moving through. He parked. He went upstairs. He made tea, not coffee, because it was late and he intended to sleep, and the work tomorrow required him to be present in the full sense. He stood at the kitchen window and watched his block do its nighttime things. Ordinary. All of it ordinary. The specific ordinariness that only becomes visible when you have been close enough to losing it to understand exactly what it consists of. He sat at the kitchen table. He opened his laptop. The patent application was in his email, sent by the attorney that afternoon after Priya forwarded the final dataset. 41 pages of clean legal language describing the new valve system in the precise technical vocabulary that federal patent filings require. At the top of page 1 in the inventor field, Deacon Wells. He read the application from the beginning, all 41 pages. He read it the way he had read the employment contract, carefully, completely, without skipping anything because it seemed routine. Because he had learned, from page 31 of the employment contract, that the things that seem routine sometimes are not. Nothing on page 31 of the patent application surprised him. Everything on page 1 did. Not because it was unexpected, because it was true. Because his name was in a field that had his name in it on a document that described work he had done. And this time the field would be submitted to a federal system that would record it accurately, and it would stay accurate, and no one would go into the system afterward and change it. His name. First. Accurate. Permanent. He made 4 small notations in the margins. Technical refinements from the day. He would send them to the attorney in the morning before the 10 o'clock meeting. He closed the laptop. He finished his tea. He looked at his kitchen. The coffee maker, the table, the filing cabinet in the corner, with the employment contract in the top drawer, and the Apex lawsuit documents in the drawer below it. Same cabinet. Different outcomes. The distance between those 2 drawers was 4 years, and a 60-day federal review period, and a subpoena for database access logs, and a woman who had written his name into a protection clause, before she had any proof it would matter. He thought about Wendell Shaw. Somewhere in this city, in a house that had felt too small for 4 years, an older man was sleeping better than he had slept in a very long time. He had done a wrong thing, and had carried it until the carrying became unbearable, and then he had put it down in the only place that could receive its full weight. Deacon did not hate him for the original wrong. He had stopped being surprised, somewhere in the third era of carrying his own weight, by the things people do when they are in the right financial pressure at the wrong moment in their lives. He was glad Shaw had called. He was glad the box had been in the garage and not the trash. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. He lay in the dark for a moment and let the day settle the way days need to settle when they have been the kind of day that changes the shape of things. He thought about the lab on the 31st floor. About 8 people at 8 stations, staying late because the work was worth staying for. About a schematic on a board with his handwriting in the margins. About a patent application with his name at the top of page 1. He thought about a toolbox set down on a polished concrete floor at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night. One sound. And everything that had followed from it. Not because the sound itself had changed anything, but because the sound had been the moment he stopped waiting for permission to be what he already was. The moment he stopped letting the gray shirt and the facilities badge define the boundaries of what he was allowed to know and say and do in rooms that had decided, without asking him, that he was furniture. He had not been furniture. He had been waiting, and the waiting was over. He closed his eyes. Outside, Seattle went on doing what cities do. Indifferent. Continuous. Carrying its lives in their thousands. None of them pausing to notice that in a one-bedroom apartment in Beacon Hill, a man who had spent 4 years being invisible had spent today being seen, and had a 10 o'clock meeting tomorrow to make sure the record reflected it. He slept. No wait. No inventory of what had been lost and what remained. No unfinished sentences running behind his eyes in the specific way that 4 years of unfinished sentences had run, patient and relentless, through every night that had come before this one. Just sleep. The kind that belongs to a man who has finally set down what he was carrying and picked up what he was always supposed to be building, and is ready, in the morning, to build it.